2020 when the first COVID-19 patient presented to our hospital. At that point, cases of the virus were very rare in the UK. Overnight, the hospital was redesigned into red and green areas, and wearing full PPE every day for hours just became the norm. I remember having lots of difficult conversations with family members over the phone because visiting was restricted, and the fear and anxiety that patients had when we told them that they had tested positive. The whole healthcare system came together like a big family, and that's what's really helped carry us through this pandemic. We're still not at the other side of the woods yet, but I think with the vaccine programs and the rapid testing, we're getting closer for sure.
In my experience, COVID pandemic in the year 2020 when it started was all about understanding the nature of the disease, long working hours, working with PPE kits, societal pressure, staying away from our families for keeping them safe, morally supporting patients as they were isolated from their families. At some point, we even faced shortage of oxygen all over the city and high mortality rate. But now I can say it was very challenging, but the whole medical fraternity overcame it successfully.
These are truly unprecedented times. Although the necessary focus has been the immediate care of the patients and communities, the overall ambiguity, the inconsistent information, the frequent change of protocols added to the sense of futility and helplessness among us. Added to this was the inadequate personal protective equipment to such an extent that I remember that we had to get extra equipment from other hospitals, the extreme shortage of staff, the shifts which lasted for more than 24 hours to 48 hours, with inadequate remuneration, the fact that we had to continue working despite the fact that we ourselves were ill, silently incubating the virus, the old mindset that the physician continues working and we keep the patients as our priority has to change in these current times.
In Germany, the situation was sinister even before we started getting patients. This was in the initial phase where only the tertiary centers took in COVID patients with ARDS. There was an alarming shortage of PPEs. I remember my chief of staff driving after work to speak to the local factories to somehow produce makeshift PPEs. Fast forward a couple of months, all the semblance of a normal work day has been decimated. With new protocols for treatment surfacing each and every week, chaos was an understatement if I had to describe the environment. The amount of time and labor each ARDS patient demanded simply could not be met by us. It wasn't about seeing the light at the end of the tunnel anymore. It was more like taking a step in the dark, hoping the march would end soon.
Your Excellency, Ms. Aisha Al-Abduli from the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, and other esteemed members from the same ministry. My dear colleagues and associates, on behalf of CPI Industry and Climate Control Middle East magazine, I extend a warm welcome to you to the 6th edition of the World Indoor Environmental Quality Conference. In this pleasant venue, provided by the Sweden Pavilion and facilitated by System Air, which is a co-host of this conference. It will be an understatement to say that we have all gathered here in person or through digital means for a conference of mission-critical magnitude. In the past 2 or so years, many of us have lost friends and family and personally suffered from ill health. We have been separated from families and extended families and seen fractured marriages and disruption of economies. Equally tragic, school children have been deprived of social interaction, so vital for growth and development. This is the sixth edition of the conference. While the past editions were no less crucial, there was a certain lack of intensity, of context, of that personal experience. And we as a magazine don't mean to sound controversial, but we always had a feeling that despite strong empirical evidence, indoor air quality was viewed as indispensable, as something that could be value engineered out. And it took a single-stranded RNA virus to bring us to our knees. In a strange way, I believe we needed this jolt, this wake-up call, that it was time that we became serious about indoor air quality. And so, we have all gathered here to talk about the virus, about how we can improve our condition, about how we can achieve freedom from fear. In the past 2 years, my team and I have opened the pages of Climate Control Middle East magazine to a diversity of opinions and perspectives in a truly democratic manner. We have been inclusive of all views, from those that say we need to adopt even energy-intensive means to improve indoor air quality, to those that strongly oppose the school of thought and argue that we don't need to take an extreme approach and that we already have solutions that can address IEQ without compromising on energy efficiency. Speaking on behalf of CPI industry, it is my fond hope that this conference mirrors the open-minded approach of the magazine and allows all viewpoints. It is through discussing them and through a system of eliminating or accepting that we can arrive at a distilled form of the direction we need to take in achieving a common goal. We have chosen the phrase extraordinary IEQ for this conference. It does not mean threatening the hard-won achievements of climate change mitigation. We leaned on the phrase to drive home the need for a more conviction-based approach to building performance. That while the need to lower greenhouse gas emissions is an important one, we simply cannot and must not ignore the vital nature of indoor air quality. To do so, we have gathered what I believe is a galaxy of extraordinary individuals, in person and through digital means. Some of them have traveled from the far corners of the world to be here in our midst, and we are immensely grateful to them for this and appreciate their commitment to the cause of indoor air quality. And we are thrilled at the prospect of rich insights and implementable recommendations emerging from this conference. Recommendations impacting existing buildings and new construction. Now, what Ayman has said is in the context of greenhouse gas emissions, but I do believe that his words can as much apply to indoor air quality, that half of the buildings standing in 2060 have not been built yet, and that we have a golden opportunity to design and build them like fortresses against future possible pandemics. I request each and every one of you to share your views and points with unprecedented freedom and candor. The world is waiting for lasting solutions, and the global gathering of thought leaders in this room is, I believe, a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for progress. Thank you so much. Thank you again. And now it's my duty to invite to the stage Mr. Adam Dia. Adam represents Systemair, the co-host of this conference. As CPI industry, we thank Systemair for its significant role and leadership in supporting this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to please put your hands together for Ms. Adam Dia.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Adam Dia, and I am the General Manager for Systemair here in the UAE. It's my great pleasure today to welcome all of you to the IEQ 6th edition here in Dubai. And also, I would like to give a distinguished welcome to the people who come all over overseas just to be with us today. Systemair is, of course, pleased to be a host for this event as a global leader in the ventilation sector. The HVAC sector industry plays a critical role today in ensuring the healthy building environments, which is more relevant than ever given in the pandemic and the emphasis of the health, safety, and well-being building equipment. Indoor air quality and the wider indoor environmental quality IEQ are both important subjects in the spotlight with a direct impact of the physical health in the building equipment. Today's event presents the opportunity for us to sit together as an industry, address the challenges we are faced with, and on the journey to ensure and see a better, sustainable, healthier indoor environment. As we enter the recovery phase of the pandemic, we need to work harder to ensure what we don't lose sight of the importance of optimal indoor environment. With that, I wish you an interesting, engaging afternoon as we take a deeper look into the IEQ of the vital role our industry has to play. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce the chairperson of this conference, Ms. Omnia Halavani. Omnia is the co-CEO and co-founder of UAE-headquartered Griffin, which is a multidisciplinary engineering consultancy firm that focuses as much on energy efficiency as on the well-being of communities through leadership and design of sustainable built environments. In short, Omnia, by virtue of leading the firm, has a tremendous track record and the experience to give stewardship to this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you to please join me in welcoming Ms. Omnia Halavani. Thank you.
Thank you, Surinder. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's very interesting conference. Indoor air quality is only one element of overall indoor environmental quality. So daylighting, thermal comfort, acoustic performance, and low-emitting materials, all factors that, when combined, they promote a healthier and a more productive environment for occupants, to live, to work, to learn, and for leisure. Our focus this forum is directed towards indoor air quality specifically. Its importance, enablers, hinders, and opportunities. We will also deep dive into the relationship between IEQ and energy efficiency, and how through innovation, collaboration, and structured frameworks, compromises need not be made. Maintaining adequate indoor air quality in buildings is not a function of design alone or building operations alone. The full cycle of a building contributes equally to the success of IEQ maintenance. Different issues arise through the different life stages of a building, from design to installation, commissioning, operations, and maintenance. For example, a wrong supply of outside air humidity content is one of the very much common design mistakes we see. Wrong installations, intake next to the exhaust is another example. How do we measure contaminants? Some people focus only on CO2, which is a good measure, but there are other contaminants that are not reflected by CO2 measures. Improper commissioning is another issue. And last but not least is the operation and maintenance, where we see overridden controls, filters that are not being maintained, and so on. So we will highlight all of those in today's maintenance. Now, as we all know and as we all experience that COVID-19 has took everyone It has shook the very foundation of everything we do in every single day, and has presumably affected all humans around the globe. And as businesses reopened, there was an observed shift within the built environment industry to focus on indoor air quality. Our anticipation during the peak of the pandemic was that the well-being of the occupants, resilience, and energy efficiency will be looked at in future projects equally and as equally important, whether those projects fall under the new construction or the existing building categories. And while we are yet to see major regulatory changes and guidelines in response to the pandemic, I think, and we all believe, that the dialogue needs to continue, more so now than ever before, to capitalize on the gains that the pandemic has got us, and to push for a shift in the perception of IEQ's importance in regulation. Across the globe, people spend most of their days in buildings, be it homes, offices, or educational facilities, so maintaining an a clean indoor environment is crucial. And whilst the broader objective of the 6th edition of the World IEQ Forum is to highlight the importance of extraordinary IEQ, an equally important aim is to help establish a structured framework leading to the successful application of innovation, allied with collaboration, coordination, and sustained engagement for climate mitigation. With this, I leave you with our first keynote address from the Ministry of Climate Change, Ms. Fatima Al-Hamadi, the head of Indoor Air Quality Section. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Thank you, Ms. Omnia. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Fatima Al-Hamadi. I'm from Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. I'm the head of Air Quality Section in the Ministry. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, with great pleasure, I greet you today on behalf of the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. Thank you to the organizers for this 6th edition of the World IEQ Forum. Thank you for facilitating this much-needed dialogue between government bodies, implementation bodies, industries association, councils, private sectors. The COVID pandemic highlighted our vulnerability to the environment risks and showcased the benefit of clean air to health and quality of life. Poor indoor air quality leads to asthma, lung cancer, cardiovascular disease, and heart attacks. The National Research on Non-Communicable Disease in the UAE, prepared by the Ministry of Health and Prevention in 2017, identified air pollution as one of the primary risk factors for the development of chronic respiratory disease in the UAE. Ensuring adequate indoor air quality is an emerging priority for the well-being of our residents, not least due to the large proportion of time that members of the general population spend indoor. In order to achieve this objective, successful collaboration and coordination of cross-sectorial stakeholders is required. The arid nature of our country and the harsh weather condition could be seen as a challenge to provide safe and comfortable indoor spaces for our residents. However, from a strategic point of view, we see this challenge as an opportunity to build a development model toward a greener, sustainable, and climate-resilient economy. The adaptation of the built environment from design, operation, and maintenance is an opportunity to control and reduce the risk from exposure to pollution, and doing so through innovative and in the context of climate action. During the past year, our wise leadership announced the UAE Net Zero Strategy. The UAE Net Zero Strategy by 2015 initiatives is the national drive to achieve net zero emission by 2050, making the Emirate the first Middle East and North Africa MENA nation to do so. The UAE Net Zero 2050 strategic initiative aligned with the Paris Agreement, a call to countries to reduce greenhouse gases emission and limit the rise of global temperature to 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. The deployment and use of clean energy solution is one of the main pillars in the UAE model for addressing the challenge of climate change and reducing greenhouse gases emission. The UAE supports green infrastructure and clean energy projects worldwide. We can rely transformed through innovation and collaboration. The role of your sector is very variable towards the achievement of this national objective. Working together for development and implementation of energy efficiency solutions tailored to our condition that simultaneously reduce the risk of pollution. In support of the country vision of raising the air quality to 90%, the National Air Quality Platform was launched. The platform provides real-time data on the air quality of the UAE, and it displays information received from 31 air pollution monitoring stations across the UAE. So the citizens can make informed decisions about their daily outdoor activities. Certain elements of indoor air quality managed are gathered in the national standard issued by the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology and the Federal Sustainability Buildings Regulation published by the Ministry of Infrastructure. For example, there are standards and codes of practice for designing ventilation systems and undertaking samples to ensure that the level of pollutants are kept to the minimum. Similarly, there are standards related to controlling the composition of surface coating products used to the indoor and the use of asbestos in the building as well. The Federal Sustainable Building Regulation also acknowledges the importance of indoor air quality and promote a combination of design decision and choice of appropriate materials to achieve the healthy indoor environment. Other building performance systems such as Abu Dhabi Bird Rating System for Istidama and Dubai Municipality Green Building Regulation also include considerations that are relevant to indoor air quality management. We strongly believe in the role of the private sector in advancing innovative that would allow for a radical improvement in the air quality and energy efficiency, while realizing economic diversification and job creation as well. Over the past few years, our ministry has been working hard to engage businesses, stakeholders, and develop concrete partnership projects to solve different environmental and climate change issues. The World IEQ Forum is an important platform for both government and industrial to share experience and explore how we can improve the quality of our indoor environments together. I wish you all a successful event and a fruitful exchange knowledge over today's proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fatima. That was very interesting. Please join me to welcome Dr. Stephanie Taylor, CEO of Building for Health, joining us from the USA. Dr. Taylor's work focuses on understanding the relationship between the built environment and occupant health, with the goal of managing indoor air quality and other building parameters to decrease acute and chronic disease. After receiving her MD from Harvard Medical School, Boston, she practiced clinical medicine for the next several decades. While caring for hospitalized patients, Dr. Taylor became convinced that indoor environmental management played a substantial yet unaddressed role in patient infections. Determined to gain a better understanding of buildings and mechanical systems, she returned to school and obtained a master's degree in architecture. Her work now focuses on designing, building, and maintaining all occupied buildings with an explicit goal of optimizing human health and productivity. Please join your hands in welcoming Dr. Stephanie.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, and thank you to Systemair and to all of the sponsors for making this important event happen. I'm really excited to come from the United States to find a whole group of like-minded professionals and people trying to understand how we can manage our buildings to both address outdoor pollution, fossil fuel utilization, and now with the hit on the head by COVID-19, we're beginning to look at the indoor environment in a way that's absolutely necessary. So I'm really excited to be here. Would it be possible to turn the lights down a little bit? Somebody? Any brave person want to attack the rheostat? No? Well, I'll get going. Can we turn the lights down just a little bit for my slides? Thank you. So to get going, so I believe that buildings, in fact, are our best medicine, not only to mitigate disease, but also to support optimal health and productivity and learning. I think this is a really important concept for all building managers to realize. And I have to say, I'm always impressed by the number of engineers or building professionals in any capacity, the interest in managing indoor environments for human health. Because unfortunately, finding clinicians or physicians in my case, with the exception of my colleague, Dr. Erith, who's in the audience, it's hard to find a physician who wants to really look at the environment as a preventive step. And I think there are many reasons for that I'm not going to go into, but I just want to thank all of you in the building industry for taking an interest in human health. So this is me. We don't need to hear any more about me. I'm a physician of a long time. I love medicine. I love biology. I love the relationship between the environment and mammalian physiology, human health. I now work a lot with ASHRAE in the United States. And then recently, several years ago, I started my second company, Building for Health, building as a noun, building as a verb. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I would like to talk about these three areas. One, the relationship between human health and the indoor environment. And it's not really all that straightforward in my experience. And secondly, I'd like to talk about how we can create more clarity about this relationship so that we can both see it, understand it, and act and remediate our buildings when necessary. And thirdly, in my experience, again, to really gain traction with any endeavor, you have to have a business model that supports what you're doing. So, in the first 10 years of my doing this, I went out and I said, well, this is the right thing to do, working in hospitals or primarily hospitals. But unless you can create a business case, in my experience again, it's very hard to implement change. If you all have a different experience, I would love to know. So I'd like to start with this relationship between human health and the indoor environment. And I just want to tell you a very brief personal story about my travels or my trajectory from medicine to where I am now. So it started quite a while ago. This was when I was in medical school. I'm in my 20s here. I think I look a little different now, but that's okay. I was in my 20s. I was working hard in med school, and I decided I wanted to have an adventure. So I went to Papua New Guinea for 4 months. It seemed like kind of a cool place to go. And I had an amazing time. It definitely was everything I'd hoped for. And I was stationed at the Wewak General Hospital. And you can see the conditions here. This is the men's tuberculosis ward. You can see there's quite a bit of outdoor ventilation. However, the beds are close together. The concrete floor was kind of dirty. In the middle, you can see that some of the family members would help take care of the patients. And on the right, that's me in the operating room, sort of staring at a patient I was watching, who was about to have surgery. But you can see I have flip-flops on my feet. The surgical nurse wasn't wearing gloves. And so as a student, I kept careful notes about how long patients came in, what were in the hospital, what their diagnosis was. And I thought to myself, this is going to be a disaster. The surface hygiene doesn't look very good. I didn't think the patients would heal all that quickly. However, I was really surprised. The patients did well. They went home when we thought they would. They didn't have a lot of secondary infections. So I get back to Boston. In the Harvard teaching hospitals, they were beautiful rooms, a lot of single rooms with private bathrooms. They looked very pristine. However, I came to realize over the years that going into the hospital in the U.S. before COVID-19 was the third leading cause of death, completely separate from why you went into the hospital. This image just shows this is the dean of my son's medical school who had a ski injury. He went in to have his knee repaired. It was supposed to be a one-day procedure. He came out 4 months later without his whole leg. and almost lost his life to a MRSA infection. And this is a little girl who was one of my oncology patients. She survived her leukemia, survived chemotherapy, and almost died from an infection. So this is a huge problem. And as a physician, I began to see, different infections in different parts of the hospital. And I began to think that the building might have a role in this. But as a doctor, I tried to talk to the facility managers, and I think when they saw me coming, they just left because I didn't know what they were talking about. They didn't know what I was talking about. So eventually I went back to school to get my master's in architecture and learn about the building. And it was an amazing experience. And it gave me a lot of firsthand understanding about why it's hard to cross silos. I was comfortable as a physician. I was a good diagnostician. I knew what I was doing. And all of a sudden, I'm trying to learn about something that was completely foreign to me. And it was really difficult. So I think that this concept of crossing silos, in this case from the building industry to medicine and vice versa, is not an easy thing. But we have to do it, in my opinion. And going even back further from the time I didn't have gray hair, if we look at the human race, at the human species, our living conditions have really changed. A long time ago, we lived in shelters where we had lots of communication with outdoor air, soil, plant material. Our building technologies become more sophisticated. Our building materials can withstand compression and tension. And by the 19th century, unless you were in agriculture, most people lived indoors, worked indoors. Fast forward to 2022, at least when we were going into our offices for work, many buildings are sealed, the windows aren't operable, they're very warm and comfortable. We've developed great sanitation systems. But surprisingly, we're also seeing a rise in certain categories of diseases, despite all the advances in medicine. We're seeing an increase in many autoimmune disorders, allergic disorders, and the reemergence of some pathogenic infectious diseases. So it bears asking the question, is there a relationship between how we're managing our buildings and this change in disease rates? So here we are dealing with COVID-19, which maybe you're all tired of thinking about or hearing about. And it's been a tragedy in many ways, but it's also been a wake-up call. And I think that to the extent that we're now focusing on supporting indoor environments for human health, I think this is going to be one of the biggest advances in this century. It's come at a high price. All of the morbidity and mortality from COVID-19. But if you look at all of the respiratory viral pandemics, they've been caused by the same family of viruses, single-stranded RNA viruses. And the reason that's really interesting to me is that single-stranded RNA viruses lack the enzymes to correct mistakes that are made during replication. So if you have a single-stranded RNA virus and it divides, could be many genetic mistakes made during that process. And this family of viruses doesn't repair those mistakes. So what that means is that mutations are formed quite readily. And if one of those mutant viruses finds a new environmental niche or micro niche in a building that it was previously unable to survive in, and if it finds a host with no immunological memory, you have the seeds of a pandemic. So my point in telling you all this is to make you think that we need to manage our environments not only to decrease what's in the air and increase risk reduction, but also to pay attention to what the indoor environment does to the human being. So I guess it's hard to turn the lights down. Oh, that's right, I forgot. Thank you. So I want to show you this very brief video. This is an animation based on data to give you an idea of what's indoors with us. So as I'm talking and you're all breathing, I hope you're breathing, little droplets come out of our airways about 100 microns in diameter, and they carry all of the normal viruses and bacteria and fungal organisms in our mouth. You can see this woman is working away. Her skin particles and all of the associated bacteria, viruses are going in the air, landing on her paper, her desk. Human beings shed a lot of particles into our environment. You can see things coming out of her nose. That's normal. Her GI tract is illuminated because we have lots of particles in our GI tract, lots of organisms that we share with the air. You can figure that out. So the point of this video is to show you that there's a lot of communication between surfaces and the air and vice versa. And that as human beings, we are constantly shedding into our spaces. And depending on how tightly sealed your buildings are, there's more or less exchange with the outdoor air. Now, does this video bother anybody? Is anyone sort of a germaphobe? Any germaphobes? Any non-germaphobes? Anyone's not going to admit it. So you might be wondering, you might be thinking, that's really disgusting. And when I first learned about the number of organisms that we send into the air, it kind of gave me pause. I found out it takes about 15 minutes before the E. coli of my husband is on my toothbrush in the bathroom. And I thought, I don't know if I like that idea. But what we have learned, in addition to the magnitude of organisms that we shed into buildings, we've learned that most of those organisms actually help support our health. You might have heard of the microbiome of your digestive system. We need some organisms to live. Buildings also have a microbiome. So when we think about managing our buildings, we want to decrease the bad germs, the pathogens, but we don't want to annihilate the good, called commensal organisms. So just something to think about. So how, in fact, do we make visible this relationship between humans and the indoor environment? So my work now is really focused on evaluating buildings from this perspective of human beings. So, we think about healthy buildings and energy consumption, which is clearly important for the outdoor climate and for fossil fuel utilization. Now we're talking about indoor air quality. But how do we evaluate our indoor environment from this perspective of human health? And I love this slide because I am obsessed with the human body. I think it's a beautiful organism. So what you're seeing on the top here is a cell membrane. So this bilayer membrane, you might remember from biology, encircles our cells. And for something to get into our tissues, compounds have to pass through a polar environment, so water soluble, through a non-polar environment, which is like oil, kind of like oil and water, back through a polar environment. So when you think about all the things that are in the air, that might be in the air, so particles, gases, volatile organic compounds, carbon combustion byproducts, these things, if they get into our bodies, can affect us one way or another. But it's not only these individual compounds that we need to think about, but when they interact with each other through indoor air chemistry, you have secondary compounds forming. So we have to consider both the primary and the secondary compounds when we think about human health. And when these things do penetrate your bodies, even if they're abiotic, even if they're not infectious microbes, they affect our normal physiology. Cardiovascular disease is related to particle counts. Your cognitive functioning, your hand-eye coordination, your energy level is very much influenced by particles and gases that are absorbed very quickly into your body, as well as membranes such as your cornea, your skin, that have direct contact. So the indoor environment is hugely impactful to our health. So when I think about all of the things that we need to, or the disciplines that we need to consider in creating a human health standard, engineers are used to thinking about what's in the air, particles. Are they infectious? Maybe you're familiar with the Wells-Riley equation. And that's very important. However, we also need to think about what is the influence of indoor air quality on all of those microbes that we're shedding into the building microbiome. And in the boxes that are not colored, I've just indicated some of the testing techniques. And then we also need to think about how the indoor air quality affects our immune system. And I was really delighted to discover that there's a whole field called eco-immunology that primarily applies to invertebrates, but people have already been thinking about this. And then not only how does indoor air quality affect our immune system, how does it affect the rest of our tissues? How does it affect our fertility? How does it affect the birth weight of our offspring? How does it affect what's known as epigenetics? These are all components of a human health standard. How am I doing for time? I'm going to skip these slides. So how have I been addressing this? So myself and my colleagues, we've identified the 11 indoor compounds that we know that are important for human health. We monitor them continuously. We integrate the impact on the human body with our human health algorithm, and we create a single score that gives you the health impact of your indoor environment. And then you can tease that score apart to understand what goes into it. And that's what your dashboard looks like. So when we were first working on this monitoring system and creating this score, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, we're going to use so much energy, this is going to be a huge conflict with sustainability. But in fact, it's not. It's not necessarily, because what we have found is that because we're looking at the interaction of these indoor compounds, if you do have a problem, if your score is low, red flag, you need to do something. Maybe there are too many particles in your air, an invisible factor. Maybe there's ozone production from indoor electronic equipment. VOCs are being off-gassed from materials. But because we look at the interaction of these things, you can actually choose remediation strategies that are flexible given your climate, your climatic zone, given your building type, your building envelope. So for example, if your VOCs are high, maybe you don't want to take out all your new carpet and materials. And you can manage your relative humidity to decrease off-gassing. So by looking at secondary chemistry, we can actually find a balance between low energy use. We can choose the most inexpensive or the least costly building remediation strategies so that we can protect human health without spending a fortune. And again, for those of us who are working on managing indoor air quality for human health, I encourage you to really think about the value of a healthy human being in whatever building vertical you're thinking about. So again, at home in the United States, what's the value of being able to, for a commercial building owner, what's the value of a healthy tenant? In a school, what's the value of good academic performance and decreasing absenteeism? Senior living communities are a very good example of people who are dramatically impacted by the environment. You might be thinking, well, where are hospitals in this? Hospitals are challenging. If anyone's ever tried to get infection control data from a hospital for the baseline, I don't know about you, but I'm sort of walked out the door as if 60 Minutes is behind me. You know, hospitals are a little loath to reveal some of these numbers. But if you're in this area, work hard to create a business model for change. And then finally, because I think I'm out of time, I want to share my true sentiment, which is if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So this is me skydiving. I skydive a lot. I have about 2,500 jumps. This was me on a bad day. My altimeter wasn't working. It was about 200 feet off. So I came into the drop zone. I did my downwind, my base, my final, and I came in way too hot and did a major face plant. And unfortunately, my friend had a camera that captured that moment. But you know, it exists. That moment exists. So there are two lessons here. One, we know that we have issues with the indoor environment. We can't just hide from them. And secondly, we need to create visibility around the human being and the indoor environment and that relationship. And then this is a day when my altimeter was working. I was having a great time, and everything went very smoothly. So, in summary, I feel that it's really important that we, number one, acknowledge how powerful the indoor environment is on our health. We need to give visibility to it, and I think monitoring is a great way to do that. When you understand the interactive chemistry, you can create energy-efficient solutions. We have found that, and I skipped these slides in the interest of time, but the whole concept of managing relative humidity in this mid-range zone, 40 to 60%, is very, very good for the human body. and it's primarily low relative humidity that causes problems, drying out your respiratory mucosa, allowing deeper penetration of harmful particles, allowing more airborne dissemination. Again, I could talk for a long time about all of these topics, but we have other people to hear from. But managing your humidity in this zone is very, very important. And then again, finally, to remember that healthy people are very profitable. So thank you. I hope did I stay within 20 minutes?
Some questions.
And that's my buddy, Luigi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephanie.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask the audience, do you have any questions for them? Can we take some questions from the audience?
Definitely.
If you got a question, just raise your hand and the mic will come right to you. All right, I have a question.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, yes.
Is there any question from the audience? Here, please.
Wait for the mic, please.
Excellent talk.
Thank you.
Wait a minute. There are people online that want to hear you too.
Yeah. I just said that excellent presentation and excellent personal experiences.
Thank you.
Humorous. Great. Your talk was mainly on air, outdoor and indoor. Are there any other factors? Something which comes to my mind is electromagnetic waves, which are on the rise due to COVID-19 because of all this 5G, Wi-Fi. Is there any study done by US EPA or Harvard Medical College? How does it affect the behavioral pattern or the brains or other organ systems of the human beings?
Wow, that's a great question. So electromagnetic radiation. So when I think of that, I think of energy that's emitted primarily or initially from the sun. Is that what you mean?
I'm not very sure.
Well, no, I mean electromagnetic radiation is really the...
I'm talking about electromagnetic radiation or the waves that emanate from the Wi-Fi systems or through the 5G systems and those kind of things. So, and those must be on a rise because those uses are on rise.
Yes.
Because we are confined to the indoor spaces.
So I think you're right. I think that, so you mean Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and, I'm not an expert on that. I've done some research on how electromagnetic radiation from solar flares affects tension in the ground, which influences the amount of radon that's released into our buildings and gamma and alpha waves. I'm not sure. I don't think that's what you're asking about, but I think the short answer is I'm really not an expert in that, but I think you're right that there are some health effects. But I can't really with authority speak about that. I'm sorry.
There's a question here.
Thanks, Hedda. Stephanie, great talk.
Thank you, Mark.
As usual. I have two questions. The first one is specifically, I think it's really important when you highlighted the interaction between those things that are within the air, the airborne compounds and VOCs and that. And I wonder if you have a little more insight you could share with us on the interaction between humidity that you mentioned and off-gassing and VOCs.
So humidity's water vapor is such a fascinating compound in our building. So, Mark, Dr. Arth was asking, what about VOCs and humidity? So when the humidity is high, meaning 70% and higher, you have increased release of VOCs from materials. So, again, I'm used to speaking in areas where high humidity is not so much of an issue, but it is very important to address high humidity if you're having an issue with VOCs. The other thing that I've been learning from talking to my colleague, Mark, is that even VOCs and gases, they act like particles. So when you're remediating, another approach, if you don't want to rip out all your carpets, is to use the particle removers. There's amazing technology around particle removal that will decrease the risk from even VOCs, carbon dioxide. Yeah.
Thank you. And then the other thing is that I think is interesting is, do you think we're going to be able to somehow, you kind of touched on it, get rid of the bad pathogens and keep the good ones? Or is that going to be an impossibility?
Oh, I don't think it's impossible. It's interesting. The indoor environment's so powerful in terms of microbial dissemination. We now know that even the transmission of antibiotic-resistant genes can occur through the air. So I think to decrease the pathogens in our buildings and to increase the diversity of the microbiome of the building, we need, number one, manage humidity. Dry air allows the dissemination of particles. The particles that tend to survive in the air, the bacteria and viruses, are the ones that happen to be pathogenic. So how do we decrease the bad ones and keep the good ones around? One is try to get rid of them in the air. So humidify. Use appropriate particle removal systems, especially in vulnerable buildings, but in all buildings. So manage the air when it comes to pathogens and bacteria. That's sort of a clumsy answer, but humidification and air purification, particle removal systems are very important. Ventilation is important. Filtration is important. But if you try to ventilate your building to dilute airborne pathogens and you have low relative humidity that are creating particle movements that don't really respond to gravitational forces, it's really hard to reduce the count in your air. So I recommend that we don't look at filtration and ventilation in isolation. Yeah. Hi.
Hello. Just wanted to ask you something. Thank you for the lovely talk. I just wanted to ask you regarding the data that you captured on these examples that you've shown us.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what?
In the examples that you've shown us on all of the data that you have been using, is there any observable relationship between increased indoor air quality and energy usage? Did you get any data on that also?
So have we found a relationship between energy conservation and improved indoor air quality? So my work with the sensing technology is fairly early on, so we don't have a lot of long-term studies, but I'm working with a group at Tufts University, John Levy, who has looked at low-income housing remediation, making them more energy efficient, and then correlating increased energy efficiency with asthma rates in children. And he has found that when steps such as improved insulation and removing inefficient gas-burning appliances, when those things are fixed, there's a decreased incidence of asthma in the pediatric population. So on a large scale, that's the only study that I can talk about off the top of my head, but we are finding that when we do need to remediate because of a low health impact score, a bad score, because we have choices, so far in the clients that we've been working with in the United States, we haven't had any huge expensive renovations. Altering the operations and maintenance of the buildings usually corrects the problem. So I hope that answers your question.
We will be covering this topic as well later on in a panel. So.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah, right. I mean, that's the question. How do we, maintain our course with energy efficiency and protect human beings indoors?
I think we have one more question.
Yes, if I may. The problem in the Gulf is more to do with high humidity and dehumidification rather than adding humidity. And the reason for the high humidity levels indoors comes primarily from oversizing of the cooling equipment. And that in turn stems from people's desire over here to associate good air conditioning with lower temperatures. People want 22 and lower.
Yeah.
So the problem is a little bit different over here. But what my question is related to what is the driving force, which in the case of high humidity, which exists here, causes excessive off-gassing. What is the driver? What is the force which increases the off-gassing because of the high humidity?
So why is off-gassing associated with higher humidity? I'm not truly an inorganic chemist, but I think it's the solubility of certain compounds in water vapor. I know, such as with, for example, with nicotine, it's more soluble.
Water vapor goes from essentially the same way as electricity, from a higher voltage to a lower voltage, higher pressure to a lower pressure, etc., etc. So this sounds sort of anti-intuitive, where the vapor pressure in a high humid area would be higher than what would be from the sources which are letting off gas. What is the driving force which is increasing the amount of off-gassing?
I don't know, actually. Does anybody have any idea about why higher humidities increases off-gassing of many compounds? I can look into that and get back to you if you give me your contact information.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Stephanie. I guess that's... Thank you.
So do I keep this on?
Check with it.
Attention and questions. Do I keep this on? Okay. So should I just sit down now?
I'm introducing someone else, then we'll have our panel.
Okay, so I can go sit. Okay.
Please. I think I speak on behalf of everyone here that this was a refreshing take on the subject, so thank you very much, Dr. Stephanie. Allow me, please, to welcome Morten Schmelzer to stage. Morten is Technical Marketing Director and Head of Public Affairs at Systemair Group, the co-hosts of this forum. Systemair is one of the world's leading ventilation and air conditioning companies with operations in more than 50 countries. Next to Systemair, Morten is also board member at Eurovent Middle East, steering committee member at the European Ventilation Industry Association, vice chairman at Eurovent International, and he is a frequent guest here in Dubai and actively involved with Systemair activities in the GCC region. Please put your hands together to Mr. Morten.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So, as said, my name is Morten, working for Systemair, one of the leading ventilation manufacturers globally, and I'm proud to be back in Dubai today, and it's an honor to give the industry keynote address during this World IEQ Forum here at this impressive building. Before I start, some Systemair-related information. During the entire event in this awesome building, please share and like. You can use this hashtag Systemair Expo 2020 in your posts, and all of us will be happy. So what am I going to talk you through during the next 15 minutes, roughly? 100 cubic meters of fresh air per hour per person. Why it's time to place indoor air quality at the forefront of sustainable HVAC. That's the title. And before I tell you what these 100 cubic meters are all about, let's start on a more holistic level. And here I follow my colleague Oleg Lassel, who has given a presentation in November at this very stage. So let's ask the following question. What comes to people's minds when thinking about buildings? And with people, I don't necessarily mean us HVAC experts in here, who many of you are, but I mean the normal human being that is not so closely related with the HVAC industry. So what do they usually associate with buildings? Is it design? So like this interesting example of vertical gardening of a famous building in Milan, Italy. Is it maybe skyscrapers, like you see here with this impressive skyline of Hong Kong? Or is it purely fantasies, like you building a treehouse together with one of your children in the middle of a forest? I mean, there are so many things that we associate with buildings and that come to our mind. But let's also remember, what does usually not come to people's minds when we are talking about buildings? Let's be honest here and talk about the often invisible. First one, How efficient is the chiller on my roof? I mean, what is actually the seasonal energy efficiency ratio of the chiller that is somewhere on my roof? People may know how powerful the processor in their latest MacBook is with an M1 chip, but no one really asked what is the SEER of a chiller, unfortunately. Another one, which refrigerant flows through my pipes? Also not the most likely question. Which one is it? And which impact does it actually have on the environment? Are they a fan like me of natural refrigerants? Then how many cubic meters of fresh air do I actually receive per hour? Right now, for instance, in this room. How clean is the air that I receive? Unlike refrigerants and seasonal efficiency, this is actually a topic that should be very close to people's minds because it affects them imminently. So let's agree, there are certain things in life that we take for granted, but the air we breathe is one of them actually. But should it be? Because it's everywhere. We have the diffusers in this room, this beautiful fabric ducts. So do people really look at it? So ventilation and the air we breathe, in our opinion, shouldn't be taken for granted. That's why we believe that it's more important than ever to change the narrative. We need to get the importance of ventilation and indoor air quality up on the agenda and in people's minds. We need to transform from a more academic and industrial discussion to a topic which is close to everyone's heart. So instead of only wondering about the temperature in a room, for instance, is it cold enough as we have heard earlier, it would be awesome if people actively say, is the air in my room clean enough as well? And I hope we will get there at some stage. And this is why some of you may have already seen our campaign across the social media groups. We at Systemair Group titled our Expo 2020 sponsorship campaign, Let's Vent. Let's vent together, because we believe that there is something we really need to ventilate. And it's not just the Swedish pavilion here at the Expo 2020. Why is this? Referring here also to Stephanie Taylor's presentation earlier on. I mean, ventilation and filtration play an essential role in providing a healthy indoor environment. Especially COVID-19 should have shown how relevant this topic is. Not only to dilute the indoor or remove viruses from indoor spaces, it's essential in so many other areas. For instance, ventilation, of course, contributes to the well-being at our home. Indoor air pollution is one of the highest risk factors out there, as shown by many studies, and as also Tobias Zimmer will highlight later in his presentation. In the end, ventilation saves life. Today, in many areas, we build very airtight buildings. Buildings are becoming tighter and tighter. So we need to ensure that there's a constant air exchange inside the building. Then, on a more general level, look at the schools. Good indoor air enables our children to learn more and better. It also makes them focus longer and stay attentive during the school hours. And this has been scientifically proven repeatedly. But is everyone really that aware of this issue? Good indoor air also allows all of us to be more productive at work. The times of poor ventilation and sticky offices should really be a thing of the past, we believe. Because in the end, ventilation is everything. So we highly believe that it's time to place ventilation and indoor air quality at the forefront of sustainable HVAC. And as I'll show you in a bit, IEQ and sustainability do not need to contradict themselves. The question came also up earlier. And what's a better occasion to showcase this at this very building, at this impressive event here in Dubai? So let me now start on a more holistic level. Very simply, with a term we all love. Most of you, I think. Heating, ventilation, air conditioning, in short, HVAC. So when we say in many parts of the world though, what do people first think about when thinking about HVAC? It's usually air conditioning. So, or in colder regions, it's more heating. The concept of comfort-driven ventilation itself is historically comparatively new, and it's not the first thing people think about when thinking about HVAC usually. So in the Middle East and America especially, people, meaning also non-HVAC experts here again, they tend to speak about air conditioning first and foremost. We even have situations, and let's be frank here, in many regions people still think that the AC split unit they find in their living room actually provides fresh air. They don't know that it mainly recirculates and cools the air inside the room. So while there were admittedly first attempts we have seen over the past 2 years in Japan of adding fresh air supplies to split units, this is definitely not happening in 99.9% of the cases today. So that is why we believe that we need to strengthen the V. We need to really highlight the V inside HVAC more. If you think about it also, us people, we historically live outdoors. We have been living in forests, in deserts, for instance. So we are just used to fresh air. Fresh air is what we need and deserve. So let's actually give it the value it deserves and the importance. And not only during COVID, because now we had all this COVID boom bringing this topic to attention. Now that COVID is slowly phasing out, hopefully, let's not forget about it. So let me also use the situation to get the facts straight concerning this issue and tackle some common misperceptions that we feel as an industry came up over the past years. So we believe, let's differentiate a little bit. Let's make a comparison to explain the differences between air conditioning and ventilation. Note that these are my own definitions, and they by no means exhaustive or scientific. They are purely for explaining it in a more simple way. I've added the term air cleaning here, as we have heard earlier as well, which became much more prominent during the recent COVID debates. So looking at it, we have air conditioning. Let's say we assign here an example product, a split air conditioner. The main purpose here is to cool or to heat. It can also heat. It, in most cases, doesn't supply any fresh air. It recirculates the air indoors, and it has no to limited filtration abilities. In a split unit, you just don't have a lot of space to ensure a thorough filtration. Now look at the ventilation. At the ventilation side, example product here, a thorough air handling unit. An air handling unit has ventilation has the essential function of providing air, simply providing. It can here provide fresh air supply, for instance, through air handling units, but also it can recirculate with proper filtration and often also humidification. And then we added air cleaning. And with air cleaning in this particular definition, I mean mobile air cleaners and purifiers, these devices you put on the room, in a room. So cleaning the air in the room, they usually also don't have fresh air supply. They recirculate the air inside the room, and they tend to have a limited air volume, at least the common ones, the non-industrial ones you find in the Home Depot or wherever. And talking about air cleaners, let's show an example of what we as manufacturers are sometimes confronted with. Here a made-up quote of a consultant, John Doe, a head of facility management, saying, "I don't have a fresh air ventilation system. Should I add a mobile air purifier to my rooms or office spaces?" As Professor Taylor has said earlier, we need to think about what will be the right combination here in the future. What we believe, when we are confronted with these issues, it should be first and foremost an interim or additional solution, additional in a way to support a ventilation system. It shouldn't be chosen to replace a fresh air ventilation system. Also remember here, you usually need a large size to enable sufficient air transfer with these air purifiers. I brought an example here of two models. The left one, maybe one of the most common models from Xiaomi. This Mi thing you place in the room, very easy, but it's super small. And then you have one of the typical ones common in Europe these days in school, big ones which have a high air volume, but they are really big, I mean up to 2 meters high. And so in order to have a proper filtration in the room, you need a big size. And then also look, the small ones usually, you see on there, they measure PM 2.5 particles. That's about it, but that doesn't mean a lot. I mean, it doesn't necessarily detect any virus whatsoever. So I have such a device at home, but I manually adjust the speed of it because it doesn't detect everything, only PM 2.5. So I think we also need to see here that certain minimum requirements are being fulfilled with such air cleaners, such as a HEPA filter, and generally look at the capacity. At the moment, we also feel that it's difficult to validate manufacturers' claims. Standards are evolving. We, for instance, have a Eurovent certification for air cleaners, which is not yet that prominent, but things are moving. Then let's look at another misconception we believe concerning fresh air ventilation, specifically prominent here in the Middle East region. Mrs. Jane Doe, planner, I prefer recirculation systems as providing fresh air will consume a lot of energy. We have also heard this earlier on. And firstly, before answering it, let's remember a main question. What is actually the purpose of ventilation? The purpose is to provide people with fresh, well-filtered air, as for the reasons I outlined earlier on in my keynote. So achieving fresh air indoor with minimum energy use is not contradicting itself. Why? From an industry perspective, more simple answer, energy recovery systems. An example in this image you see here, an air handling unit with a rotary heat exchanger. So these devices can recover the heat and the cooling in a building, but also, and that's important, the humidity. And by doing so, they can also reduce the actual cooling demand in a building and lower the necessary chiller capacity, which is not always known down here. And this very building, actually, the Swedish pavilion here in Dubai, is a prime example utilizing the best of this technology. In fact, 60% of the indoor cooling and the humidity is recovered in this building. And by using modern absorption technology, only 40% has to be addressed with compressor cooling. You can actually see the live performance of this very building if you go to expo2020.systemair.com and see how this whole system works. You also see the live values in real time. You can also see how much energy has been saved since the opening of the Expo here, and you can see how much CO2 has been saved and how much air, cubic meters of air, flow into this building every day. Speaking about fresh air and a good indoor air quality was also touched a little bit earlier. What actually defines a good indoor air? And how many cubic meters of fresh air should a person receive per hour? Is it really 100 cubic meters like my keynote title says? Well, it really depends. And let's revisit our HVAC fundamentals class at school. So, what defines a good indoor air quality? One, of course, receiving enough fresh air. Then we tend to have commonly factors like a low CO2 level. And here, I've recently read a new ASHRAE publication that the indoor CO2 concentrations, they do not provide an overall indication of indoor air quality, but they can be a useful tool in IEQ assessments. Another factor, relative humidity, hopefully between 40 and 60%. Comfortable temperatures, a low PM1, PM2.5 and PM10 concentration in the room, as Tobias will tell you later. So there are many values of reference. Let's have a look now. When does a person actually feel comfortable? Let's reflect. Some of you may remember this Fanger equation and the Fanger comfort zone. So here, what is the right level of humidity and temperature to provide comfort to humans? you see it here in the Mollier diagram, it's a zone, it's not a fixed value. So that is the comfort zone that in his studies is defined where 95% of the people feel comfortable around the world. As said, there are no fixed values as the individual preferences really differ. And the same in the end applies to fresh air. It's not that easy to come up with a one-size-fits-all value here. So while we can always debate definitions and values, let's simplify and start somewhere. We cannot confront people with a myriad of values all the time, of which half of them might not even be understood by the normal non-HVAC people. So in the end, we have to recognize that delivering fresh air is the basis for everything. The most essential of all the requirements, which in the end also impacts the CO2 levels and the particles. So, as I already said, we are used to live outside in the past. And based on this, we have come up with a very first, I particularly mention only proposal, where we combined multiple studies. So, let's call it the system air proposal now. I need to turn around myself. So we have taken multiple factors here. We have taken the sick building syndrome on the right, and here there are studies that prove, okay, when the higher the ventilation rates, the lower the impressions of people to feel sick in a building. So the sick building syndrome decreases with higher ventilation rates. We have the CO2 level here mapped out. Of course, we want to achieve a low CO2 level in a room. Also to remember here, outdoor air, of course, doesn't have zero CO2. So outdoor air is usually between 350 and 450 ppm. Then we also added, for instance, of the IDA, IEQ, it's now called, category of the EN 16798 standard, and the supply air category, the SUP level as per the standard Eurovent 423, which is one of the most widely used, which Tobias, I will not go into detail now, Tobias Zimmer will explain you later on. So, and based on this, we defined certain rooms, room with no or very limited ventilation, as you see on top, so we consider them poor. And then if we combine these values, we come up with very good, so a room with optimal, let's call it healthy ventilation. And surprisingly, to reach these factors, you come up with a value of a minimum 72 cubic meters of fresh air per person per hour. That's just one example here with which we would like to trigger a discussion. We will publish this also after on LinkedIn and invite you all to debate this. So I would also say there is a difference then, what you see here, between what people need. So need should be somewhere here on the top, the minimum we should provide to them, and what people actually deserve. Deserve, of course, depending on the application. If you are in a gym, for instance, you might deserve much higher rates than somewhere else. So we say the value that people deserve could be quite high, higher than 72 cubic meters per hour per person. So let's ask ourselves, how much fresh air does a person really need and how much does a person deserve? We would say, let's start somewhere to define a value. Let's say at minimum 30 cubic meters of fresh air per hour per person. In our opinion, that's kind of a minimum value we could define to ensure a reasonable level of comfort, health, and productivity. But what does the future bring? And that we purposely leave open here. Is it up to 100 cubic meters of fresh air per hour per person? Is that a value people would deserve, depending on where they are? You know what? I would like to leave that up to you. And let's actually trigger a debate at this World IEQ Forum here in Dubai. We love to hear your comments, later with Surrender and the panels, and also on LinkedIn. Let's reflect. As said already, let's please start differentiating a bit more between ventilation and air conditioning. Let's get the facts and the definition straight here. Let's remember this discussion I brought up between ventilation and air cleaning mentioned earlier, that we really should avoid any misconceptions here. Let's also remember that fresh air supply and recirculation are a difference. As said, the split air conditioner in your room does not provide fresh air usually. Let's also remember that good indoor air and a minimum energy use don't have to be a contradiction. They should go hand in hand. And then let's start somewhere. Let's define 30 cubic meters as a minimum value for people, and let's see what the future brings. Let's work together to achieve a better indoor air quality with minimum energy use. Let's vent, everyone. Thank you very much.
Do we have time for questions? Do we have time for questions? Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Morten, for an inspiring presentation. And I think we all agree with you. Let's vent. And this brings us to a panel discussion. And allow me, please, join me in welcoming my guests. Starting with Dr. Iyad Al-Attar. Dr. Al-Attar is a mechanical engineer, an air filtration consultant, and an environmental enthusiast. He's also a visiting academic fellow in the School of Aerospace Transport and Manufacturing at Cranfield University. He received his engineering degrees from Canada, Kuwait, and the United Kingdom. His area of expertise is the performance of high-efficiency pleated filters for HVAC and land-based gas turbine applications, with special emphasis on the chemical and physical characterization of airborne particles. His extensive consultation for international firms and broad publications have proved invaluable in the fields of air filtration, aerosol monitoring, outdoor and indoor air quality. In 2020, he was appointed as the first associated consultant for Eurovent Middle East for air quality and filtration affairs. Dr. Al-Attar is an editorial member, referee in the Filtration Society UK and the Journal of Cleaner Production, and a columnist in the Climate Control Middle East magazine. Dr. Al-Attar, you can make your way to stage. Jeremy MacDonald has over 25 years of experience in design, energy services, commissioning, and the construction management industry of HVAC systems. He is Vice President, Guth DiConzo Consulting Engineers USA. His expertise includes indoor air quality assessments with a focus on hands-on testing and verification of system performance. Jeremy is LEED certified, CCP commissioning certified, a certified energy manager, and a professional engineer. He was an adjunct professor for 4 years at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Jeremy recently was the technical consultant to NY CERDA in development of an IEQ guideline for higher education in New York, COVID-19 Response Guide, State University of New York. Please join us on the stage, Jeremy. I also have with me Dr. Simon Miller, Government Regulatory Research and Impact Analysis Specialist at the Abu Dhabi Quality and Conformity Council. Dr. Miller joined the Council shortly after its formation in 2013. He led the establishment of Abu Dhabi Government Product Conformity Assessment and Certification Services sector, including the mechanisms by which the government determined the impact of conformity assessment on the quality, safety, and performance for products in the Emirate. His work in pioneering the services and systems of assessment in a broad range of product fields relevant to public health, infrastructure, sustainability, and emerging technologies is ensuring the quality of thousands of products from hundreds of companies throughout the GCC. We also have Dr. Rohit Pradhan with us, a pulmonologist specialist, Zayed Military Hospital. Rohit is a specialist pulmonologist and has been practicing pulmonary medicine for almost 2 decades. He has worked across several countries and considers himself fortunate for the cross-cultural exchange that has taken place throughout his career. Currently, he is involved in clinical, teaching, and research efforts in Zayed Military Hospital in Abu Dhabi, which holds national importance as a tertiary care hospital with cutting-edge academic and medical practices. He has relentlessly served COVID-19 patients since the onset of the pandemic and takes pride to be a frontline worker while managing medical patients with pulmonary ailments. He has a special interest in asthma diagnosis and treatment, and he considers himself privileged to work along leaders in respiratory medicine in the region and contribute to forthcoming publication about asthma and COVID-19. We also have Dr. Jens Thomsen, MD, MPH, Section Head, Environmental Health in the Abu Dhabi Public Health Center. Dr. Thompson has joined the Department of Health Abu Dhabi in 2007 and is currently holding the position of Section Head within the Abu Dhabi Public Health Center. Dr. Thompson is holding a Master of Public Health degree from Rollins School of Public Health from Atlanta. He is also a physician, holding an MD degree from University of Ulm, Germany, and is board certified in clinical microbiology and infectious disease epidemiology. Dr. Thompson has 25 plus years of professional experience in clinical medicine and public health with a focus on environmental health, occupational health, safety, injury surveillance and prevention, as well as clinical microbiology, antimicrobial resistance, and infection control. And Dr. Stephanie will join us as well for the panel. I believe we have a few joining us remotely, correct? Hello. I don't know if you can see us or not.
I guess I'll wait the ship. Sorry.
All right, that's okay. I'll sit you. Thank you.
Hi.
Welcome to the panel, everyone. Let's get straight into it. In light of COVID-19, how do you see the built environment has reacted? Anyone can volunteer to start.
How do we see it as what?
How do you see the built environment has reacted to COVID-19? So have we seen any changes in the way buildings are designed, in the way buildings are operated, maintained? Please go ahead.
Start.
Yes.
I guess a mixed story. I'm from the United States, focused in New York, and certainly what we saw right when we started to come out of the first period of the panic is a lot of building operators, they knew there was problems. And we are a consulting engineer. We got a lot of phone calls. We said, clients were saying, we know that we have issues with our handling units. We know we have issues with our controls. And they try to be proactive. If we look at industry sectors, at least from my experience, K through 12, public education was pretty good. I think it was pretty good before, and they just improved more. Hospitals, pretty good. Could work on the relative humidity for sure, but pretty good. Where we really struggle, at least in the States, is multifamily, nursing homes, and prisons. And that's still a struggle, and I think that's where the primary focus has to be to improve the indoor air quality, because wherever you have high density, low relative humidity, and a ventilation issue, you have the prescription for a pandemic, and I think that's what we saw.
All right, thank you very much. Simon, maybe I can move on to you.
Sure.
Can you highlight the efforts of Abu Dhabi QCC when it comes to COVID? How did the council react? Are there plans to influence the industry?
I think, this is probably just as good a question for Dr. Jens for Department of Health. This is really, the health authority's job to combat the pandemic, and for sure, we as a government body and most buildings in Abu Dhabi as well responded accordingly. We understand that buildings aren't built for infection control unless they are a hospital, right? So the best way to keep the building safe was to basically send everybody home. This is we lived and worked from home for 1 or 2 years, depending on where we were. In that time, we've had 2 years to adjust how we operate our buildings, how we operate air conditioning. We can look at what regulations we can bring in to improve indoor air quality, but we have to be understanding that the majority of building stock that we have now is going to be difficult to adjust. We saw a lot of changes, obviously, from increased interest in ventilation, extra ventilation to combat future pandemics, this pandemic. A lot of new technology was brought in terms of particularly things like UVC treatment to try and, let's say, introduce new mechanisms to control indoor air quality or infection control. But a lot of this is knee-jerk reaction. We need the time. We've got a lot of more data, as Dr. Stephanie will say now, after a few years. But now we need to process this and get a good understanding about what are the right interventions, what are the correct interventions that we can take forward to improve problems that we had before for air quality, and problems that we can see now that will be in the near future.
If I move the question to Jens, what about Abu Dhabi Public Health Center? How did you react? What are the actions that you've taken in response to COVID-19?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I would like to say the Abu Dhabi Public Health Center is like the lead entity in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi when it comes to the response to COVID-19 in terms of public health response. So, and I would like to say greetings from our Director General, His Excellency Mr. Mata Al-Nuaimi, as well as from Dr. Farida Al-Hossani, who is the Division Chief Director of the Communicable Disease Sector, and who is the official spokesperson for the whole health sector and the whole UAE when it comes to corona and pandemic response. So I think the Abu Dhabi Public Health Center has really done a great job, I must say. And I was personally not too much involved in that because I'm not in communicable disease department, although I'm a microbiologist, but I'm working in occupational and environmental health and safety department. But we were leading the response of public health in Abu Dhabi. And I think the UAE is recognized as one of the world leading countries when it comes to the response to COVID in terms of vaccination rates, in terms of social distancing measures, in terms of many things, what has been involved in that. And of course, indoor air quality is also an important aspect of the response. So I think we have a multifaceted approach to the problem, looking at providing guidance to the general public in terms of education and awareness campaigns. So wear your face masks, do social distancing, and so on, as we all know, but also to health professionals, and maybe not too much to the industry directly involved in HVAC and these things, but I think our natural target audiences as a governmental public health agency are the healthcare professionals and the general public. And I think we need to work more closely with industry and also to understand better what the technicalities around these things are, because we are not engineers, we are doctors, we are public health professionals, we are epidemiologists, we are surveillance experts, we are microbiologists and these kind of things, but we are not engineers. And I think we need to work more closely together to understand what we can do to help you and what you can do to help us. I would like to stop here.
If to continue on that, actually, if I move to IED, do you have anything to add to that? So from the industry perspective, what would be a holistic approach to achieve IEQ in buildings?
Thank you, first of all, Omnia, for being the hero of this session and the entire day. Thank you, Climate Control, for hosting me. Again, I'm very happy to participate as usual. I would have loved to be in Dubai to shake the hands of all of you. Just allow me a couple of minutes to put everything in perspective in about 5 points, which has been extensively addressed in my recent article, in this issue in Climate Control Magazine, Middle East. The first issue really is when we look at better indoor air quality, it never gained political traction, needed to be a national priority. And this is something that's been ailing us, at least myself, for the past 24 years working in this field. And now the penalty that we've paid during the pandemic is very clear. Although humanity is equipped with many tools and devices and the conditions to have responded in a much better manner to the pandemic. Every time an enhanced or upgrade in air quality is proposed, it's frustrated by the complex structures and the speed at which decisions are made in the government levels, all government levels. Also, I want to talk about the song or the songs we've been singing about every time we try to upgrade an air quality, it has high pressure drop or it has a pressure drop, so there's an energy increase in terms of usage. It's always been rejected. So I think we need to ask renewables maybe to get off its tail, to have a much bigger contribution in the energy mix. So that's not an excuse. The second thing I want to talk about is we always demand an enhancement in indoor air quality, but there is no infrastructure to do so. And the infrastructure I'm asking for is having the HVAC system to include air filtration devices or cleaning sections to respond to variations in indoor air quality for all pollutants, not just the particulates, but all pollutants. The third point I want to mention is we have this addiction, especially in the region here, for washable filters. If it's not washable, it's not going to be used. We've paid a hefty bill for sticking to such a strategy. The fourth one I want to get to very quickly is we've turned our back on escalating emissions. The rising tide of air pollution has been on for years, and we've never taken any actions. We've been talking about it for a long time, but we've never gotten somebody to actually do something about it. The last point I want to mention is we demand filtration standards, but it's poorly followed, never been practiced properly, never actually been understood. And then yet again, we're asking for smart buildings equipped with the best air quality possible. I recall here what Winston Churchill said, we build or we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. So, I think we need to answer the new questions that this pandemic has actually brought upon us today. Omnia?
Thank you very much, Iyad. If I move to Dr. Rohit, let's hear a little bit from the clinical perspective. Are we ready for, hopefully it never happens, but the next pandemic? Thoughts about prevention versus cure? Can you highlight this issue a little bit for us?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Omnia. And definitely this COVID for last 2.5 years have really taken a lot of effort and part from government, from society, and from medical sector as well. And it has definitely taught us that we should be well prepared for the future. And talking about indoor air quality. So definitely the indoor environment is giving opportunity to spread germs. So definitely the good ventilation will play a very important role. And probably the better planning of ventilation in building and hospital will be much needed. Though we are fortunate to have worked in our best country in the world, where we have got excellent infrastructure in terms of ventilation, in terms of all like infectious control measures we were having. And but about developing country, definitely there is a big scope to develop. And in terms of not only a pandemic, we have to talk about the most communicable disease or non-communicable disease we have, including tuberculosis and non-communicable diseases like asthma, which asthma is a very important disease and which is common. And this is indoor air quality to keep pollution free and trigger free is very important for asthma. So definitely regarding better preparation and what past experience or that hopefully the COVID is now well controlled now. So definitely it will prepare for the future.
Dr. Rohit, did you feel that the facility management in the hospital has adapted? Has anything changed from pre-COVID to post-COVID days? Any visible changes that you have sensed?
So the facility management definitely has geared up adequately and to keep the housekeeping and housekeeping staff, their health as well. So definitely it has a change and it is a better prepared for the future as well.
That's good to hear. Dr. Stephanie, back to you from your very interesting presentation earlier. If we are to quantify IEQ, how can we do that? It's always a topic that is being debated.
How do we quantify indoor environmental quality for the human being?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it's a very complicated question, but I think it's critical that we aim to do that, because one of the reasons that I think energy has been a focus. I mean, it's clearly important, but it's also very visible. You know, your energy meter runs; you have to pay for it. I think we need that sort of visibility with human health. How do we do it? Again, I think there's really 4 quadrants of that effort. One is what is in the air. And as other people have been answering these questions, I've been thinking, well, how would I answer those questions? Like, for example, what has changed with COVID-19? I think I've seen the whole concept of infection control move just from hospitals to other buildings that don't take care of acute and chronic illnesses. I'm amazed by the number of people who know what a coronavirus is, a single-stranded RNA virus is. I mean, that's remarkable. I've also seen some concerning trends, such as that all bacteria or viruses are bad. You know, I hope we've learned from the problem with antibiotic resistance that we can't kill all organisms. Obviously, if you have a diminished immune system, or if you're in the operating room, you want to have as few around as possible. But it concerns me that even with some of the surface disinfection technology, we try to sterilize surfaces, and that's not possible. And I think we create a lack of diversity with the building microbiome. I sort of forgot your question, actually. How do we quantify it? So I think we need to pay attention to what's in the air, the risk. I think we need to pay attention to what we're doing to the microbiological communities in our buildings. I think we need to pay attention to the human immune system. So, for example, you know, we're surrounded by bacteria and viruses all the time. Every time you brush your teeth or scratch your skin, you know, they get into your body, but they don't cause overwhelming infection because we have an immune system. So how is our indoor environment affecting our immune system? I think that's absolutely critical. And then and how does the indoor environment affect perfusion of chemicals into our bodies and particles? And I don't know if you're familiar with epigenetics, but we're now learning that certain environmental influences actually are heritable, even though they don't influence our RNA and DNA per se. They cause changes around the genome. So I think we have to think really comprehensively. I think it's possible, which is what I've been working hard on.
Do you think that installing sensors and visible dashboards to users, does that help? Does it create awareness?
So does using sensors work? In my experience, yes. In my own personal experience, when I first got a sensor that monitored these 11 things, I didn't have my dashboard yet. But my colleagues called me up and said, what is going on in your office at 4 p.m? And I'm like, well, I have a headache and I'm tired, and I drink coffee and I ride my stationary bicycle, and I go home and yell at my husband that I'm working too hard. But in fact, I come to find out that the indoor air quality in my office took a dive at around 4 p.m. And it wasn't anything I could smell or feel. The ski binding manufacturing part of the building was geared up at 4 o'clock, and the VOCs and the particles were too high in my office, and I would have had no knowledge of that if I weren't actually didn't have my sensor array. And so I think it's the only way I can think of, besides having releasing canaries into our buildings like the coal miners did to see if they survived. You can't really do that in a restaurant too many times. But I think we have to create visibility around the relationship between health and the environment. And if anyone, we could grow organs on a chip, but that's kind of hard to do.
I think just to add to that as well, what's important, just as important as being able to monitor and measure, is giving the control. Yeah. Because to get people's buy-in and understanding that the indoor air quality or indoor environmental quality is affecting them, sure, you can monitor it, you can give them a display, but then if they know they can control it, then it means something.
Absolutely.
Because now they have the ability to control it.
Yes.
If it's too dark, you turn on the lights. If it's too warm, you turn on the air conditioner. If the air quality is diminished, then you have an ability to change that.
That's a great point. I think our remediation steps need to be actionable. I think, that's a really good point.
Given that, I'm just thinking aloud here, so occupants, obviously, they have a higher hand in choosing, let's say, I'm going to rent an office here, it makes me feel better, it's daylit, the air quality is good, but you will always have customers for any level of indoor environmental quality that you find in buildings. So what's more effective, regulations or visibility?
Amazing question.
Take a shot at that?
Please.
I believe in carrots and sticks, and as any parent in the audience knows, we use carrots and we use sticks when the carrots don't work. At least in the States, we have laws on the book. Okay, ASHRAE 62, when a building is started up, an engineer has to certify, and a testing and balancing contractor has to certify that we meet minimum airflow standards. The issue is, after occupancy, what happens then? And quite frankly, too often, nothing happens. And it's left to the gentleman who is charged with maintaining the systems, who's often very well-meaning, but if he doesn't have the proper budgets and he doesn't have buy-in from management, he's kind of helpless. And too often, in my opening remarks, the buildings I spoke about, nursing homes, multifamily, and prisons, too often, the folks at the ground level know about that problem. And they're well-meaning, but they can't do anything about it. So if I was king for a day, and I'm not, I'd like to see us enforce our existing laws on the book, and just like we do with fire protection, have a requirement that there's some sort of annual check on the system. In my view and experience, no one wants to see people get hurt. No one wants to see a pandemic. We don't know this. The problem is this particle is invisible. People can't see it. And unless we have a system in place that we can check on our systems, sadly, I think too much is going to fall through the cracks.
Very well said.
Yes,
please.
I just want to comment on a very critical point that was mentioned a couple of minutes ago. You asked the question about quantifying, which I think it's key, but this is half of the job done. Quantifying pollutants, their concentration and particle size distribution is certainly, one part of it. But the second part of it, which is absolutely essential, is having an HVAC system that would respond to the indoor air quality changes. That's the key, and if you look at it right now, everybody is designing an isolation, people manufacturing filters, but it's not really integrated into the HVAC system. I think sensors, filtration performance, and HVAC performance needs to be, having a holistic performance. And again, we always blame filtration. Filtration seems to be, the magic solution. Filtration is not the only reason why indoor air quality is, getting worse from time to time, and therefore it's not the only solution. So we really have to distinguish and identify whether it's a filtration issue or whether it's a ventilation issue. But quantification is the beginning. It's the right coordinates to start, to identify what are we up against, and therefore how is our HVAC system, hopefully we will have HVAC systems of that nature, to respond to such variation.
Thank you very much, Iyad.
I would like to comment also on the question regarding quantification of indoor environmental quality. I cannot directly answer that question, but when it comes to quantification, we have done an initiative a couple of years ago already, and we just updated it on quantifying the health effect of poor air quality. So it's possible applying some statistical modeling techniques to estimate the attributable burden of disease due to environmental pollutants. And about 10 years ago already, long before COVID, the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, in collaboration with the University of North Carolina and Department of Health and other governmental stakeholders in the UAE, have developed the UAE environmental burden of disease model, looking into air pollution, and I'm not talking indoor only, it's also ambient air, climate change, coastal water pollution, and other exposures, and trying to estimate what the health effect of these pollutants is. And in terms of numbers, like deaths, attributable deaths, and attributable cases of healthcare facility visits, we would like to see dailies and Healy's and these kind of health outcome measures, but episodes, we call it episodes. And for example, the indoor air quality burden of disease model has just been recently updated. And we estimated that in 2019, for example, in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, 46 people died due to indoor air quality, most of them due to environmental tobacco smoke, incense burning combustion products, and one death related to radon. It's just estimates. It's a computer model, right? And about 10,000 of cases had like episodes of asthma, cardiovascular diseases, and so and so. So it's possible to apply such statistical models, and they are based on three things. They are based on epidemiological studies done somewhere in the world, on like what's the dose-response relationship between more pollution causing more kind of disease. Then validating that kind of international studies with local pollution data. And we have done a study, we call it the 500 household study or survey, done a couple of years ago, where we actually went into 500 households in Abu Dhabi and we did monitoring of pollutants, and also looking at the number of cases that we see and the number of deaths that are reported to the health authorities, and then finding out from all of these, let's say, asthma cases and so on. So what's the attributable fraction related to the indoor air quality pollutant? And so it's possible to apply these models so we can quantify not the indoor environmental quality itself, but the health effect of poor quality. That's possible.
And that is what would, if made visible to the public, it is what would make difference.
Yeah, we can make it's available in the public domain. Yes, it has been published in PLOS One in peer-reviewed papers. Yes,
that's great. How much time do we have left, Mercy? Okay, so I think let's take questions from the audience. If anyone has any question, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to share.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd also like to talk to you.
Yeah, because we're looking at inflammatory markers and other physiological metrics.
I think the mic is missing.
Yes, that work sounds great.
Let's talk later, yeah.
Oh.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have a card, but I will email you.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk though.
Yeah, thank you. I think this discussion is a great discussion, and it has given me a lot of insights on what Abu Dhabi and the UAE has given in attention to the indoor and outdoor air environment. The question is, with this pandemic, everybody's attention was about indoor air quality and how we can make our indoor safer for the occupants. Has Abu Dhabi or the UAE enforced or developed an indoor air quality related specifically for the pandemic? And how can the government, during the construction period, enforce these codes or standards?
Does anyone want to take that question?
I think I'd just make a general comment on that. I mean, it goes to Dr. Sifny's point as well in terms of how you tackle indoor air quality when it comes to like a microbiome. What is in there? Because at the end of the day, unless, as you say, you're in a healthcare facility, it's acceptable to have viruses and microbes and fungi and all sorts of things in the air. We have an immune system. It's designed to deal with life in this way. To design a specific policy for now schools, for shopping malls, for hotels, for public buildings that then go a step further is difficult. Because you have to put in a lot of interventions that are costly for a start. And at the end of the day, it's much cheaper and easier policy to introduce to simply restrict people coming into the building. to stop the problem before it gets in the door. Have people who have COVID cannot go through if they don't have their Al Hassan app is green. This is clearly the most effective policy to begin with, without having to put all that cost and enforcement, particularly if it's a regulation, into the infrastructure. Whether that's the approach going forward for the next pandemic or for in the future, this is, I think, still something that has to be decided on a regulatory level. But for sure, that approach had a huge impact and a positive impact in controlling the pandemic.
Thank you, Simon. Do we have more questions from the audience? Can you please just, whoever is asking, introduce yourself before the question?
Hi, Mark Areth from Rochester, Minnesota Mayo Clinic. Excellent panel. Thank you very much. A lot of great insight. I'm wondering, if we could consider proposing something with regard to monitoring. PM 2.5 is commonly monitored as a surrogate for air quality. Certainly, it's a good test. We know that particle counts are a reasonable surrogate for airborne viruses and bacteria, pathogens as we know them. But I wonder if with PM 2.5 it's a little bit too non-specific, and maybe should we consider monitoring PM 1.0? And because that's going to give us a better read on certainly airborne viruses as a good surrogate. So I was wondering what the panel might think of that.
So I can tackle that.
Please
I know PM 2.5 are, that's large. It's fairly large, and the really fine PM is more, reaches our alveoli more readily. And even, the virus itself is teeny tiny. We exhale it, so you don't generally see it in isolation. But I know the value of even down to 0.4 microns diameter is key. So I think while it's useful to have surrogate metrics like PM 2.5 or CO2 for ventilation, I absolutely agree with you. I think being able to have greater visibility into the more specific risk factors and control those would be beneficial.
Can I add to that? Doing a lot of testing with indoor air quality systems and building performance, it's tricky. It's really tricky. The particle count, it could be shifted drastically by what's going on out in the street. So trying to establish an absolute value, I think, may be tricky. But we all know buildings are like human bodies, right? First step is we go to the doctors, we take our heart rate, then we take our oxygen level. We got to get those basics. And once you have the basic operating parameters of building, such as particle count, CO2, VOCs, then, just like a patient and how a doctor attends to a patient, then we can say, well, wait a minute, that CO2 level is going up. Why? Well, maybe it's because the outdoor air damper got shut because the actuator failed or whatever. So I'm a proponent of, let's think about buildings like we think about our human body. Let's establish a benchmark, and let's learn, and over time, then we can react intelligently.
Yes. Certainly an instantaneous result's not going to be very helpful, but certainly something averaged over time is going to be much more meaningful, without a doubt. And that makes me think of another thing. We talk about kind of commissioning standards, as you said, and as you commented on, but ongoing standards annually. And I think in light of what we now know about not only from the pandemic, but just the microparticles, ultrafine particles in disease, cardiovascular disease, dementia, all of these other illnesses, I might really push to have monthly standards or continuous measurements that we then look at actual averages, right? So because, I don't care what happens over the course of 30 seconds, but I do care if there's an 8-hour exposure to a burst of whether it's CO2 or whether it's whatever.
Can I respond?
Please do.
100% agree. In the States, there's a company called Aircuity, and they monitor a whole bunch of the primary variables. And once the operators learn the system, it's fantastic. The whole reason why I'm here from New York State is because my wife said, you've been talking about this for 2 years. You got to go. And to me, success looks like 2 years from now, and I do think it's going to take at least 2 years, where people are talking about PM, CO2, ventilation, VOC, just like we're talking about our heart rate. And it's going to happen. I truly believe that because more and more people are talking about it, more and more people recognize it's so germane to making sure that we don't have another terrible experience like this pandemic.
And this is why we need to capitalize on this knowledge and let's say the talk that's happening in people to effect more change in regulations and manufacturing and innovation. This is the way forward, I think. Do we have any more questions in the audience? We'll take one more last question, if you can make it.
Well, good afternoon.
Hello? All right, we'll take both questions, but let's make the answers short.
So I'm Durga Kamath from Air Policy Center, India, and I'm an environmental architect. So I would like to ask a very specific question related to architecture. So how it is related to IEQ. So in which case do you think that IEQ or IAQ is better? Whether it's better in heritage buildings or it's better in modern buildings?
I'll take that one. So what we've been finding in our studies is that it's often the buildings with the more vernacular buildings with porous building materials that have a healthier indoor air quality. So for example, when there are micropores in, say, wood or concrete or stone that can actually store water vapor in the capillary form, not liquid condensation where mold can grow, but that we have modulation of indoor water vapor levels in a healthier range. So while I can't generalize that, it's always the vernacular building that has a better indoor air quality, often it is. And what I find really fascinating is the studies by Van Dorlen in New England Journal looking at or comparing the survival of coronavirus on surfaces. And so comparing stainless steel to cardboard to hands that were exposed to, SARS-CoV-2, a certain amount of time went by, then the virility of the virus was reassessed. And of those three surfaces, stainless steel, which is anhydrous, had the highest number of infectious viruses after some period of time. So I think that, modern surface materials are not always, while you want them in high-touch areas where you try to disinfect, I think they're not always the best for the indoor environment. That's a gross generalization, but I think you can't assume a modern new building is going to have the best indoor environmental quality.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephanie. One last question.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks a lot for this afternoon and useful time for speaks and questions, comments. I am Dr. Amr Alawi from Nanjing University of Science and Technology, China. I'm associate professor in environmental engineering. My question is about how much the local weather affect the green buildings. I mean, on other way, the productivity and efficiency between areas, between countries, different weathers, different countries has different weathers, even in same country. So I want to know how much we should modify the results between areas to have the best efficiencies for smart buildings.
If we can answer that really short, and I know that we have a presentation later on that addresses that specifically, so if can anyone give a short answer to that, or do we leave it for the presentation to be answered? We'll leave it for the presentation to be answered later on. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the panelists. This was very, very interesting. Our next panel commences now. So please, a round of applause for our panelists.
so glad to meet you.
Yeah, nice
that you're
to
here.
Yeah, I enjoyed your talk. Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Stephanie, you're joining us for the next panel, so
Yes.
please stay seated. I'll introduce the rest and we can get started.
Oh. Hey, let's stay in touch.
So our next panel is about manufacturers on working towards extraordinary IEQ. Dr. Stephanie is with us, yes. And I'd like to re-welcome Morten back to the stage, Mr. Morten Schmelzer from Systemair. We will also be joined by Mr. Tobias Zimmer, Vice President, Global Product Management and International Standards from Campbell. Tobias Zimmer is an experienced air filter specialist with more than 18 years of experience in the international ventilation industry. He holds an MBA in International Management from EuroFH, University of Applied Science in Hamburg, and he has joined Campbell since 2009. He's also an active committee member of various certification bodies, associations such as ISO, CEN, Eurovent, and many more. We also have Mr. Bill McQuaid, Vice President, Industry Sector Services and Industry Sector Lead Applied Refrigeration with AHRI MENA UAE. Bill McQuaid has, he comes to AHRI after 26 years working for the York International Johnson Controls organizations in various technical, managerial, and regulatory roles. Throughout his career, he has been a very active member of our global industry. In the ASHRAE Society, he recently served as Director at Large on the Board of Directors and was Society Vice President from 2019 to 2021. Bill is an ASHRAE Fellow and received the ASHRAE Distinguished Service Award in 2012. And during his career, he has been awarded 17 US and international patents related to chiller design, oil separation, chiller control algorithms, and leak detection for flammable refrigerants. We have Mr. David Shirk with us as well, Director of Healthcare and Applied Engineering Markets, Global Plasma Solutions from the USA. David is the CEM, Lead AP, CDSM, CWEP, CHC, and an ASHRAE Distinguished Lecturer, is the Director of Healthcare and Applied Engineering Markets for Global Plasma Solutions in Charlotte, North Carolina. He is a licensed designer of engineering systems and has over 40 years of experience in the design and analysis of heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems for a variety of market sectors, with a special focus on aerospace and healthcare facilities. And with this, we will commence our panel.
This is great.
All right. So, please. I'm sorry. I think I missed.
Hi.
Where is Bill?
Yasmin Skanji, Scientific Director of ZAC, RDI Department. I'm very sorry for missing that. Do we have a bio that I can introduce? Maybe you can introduce yourself for us. Please do.
I don't know if my micro is on or not.
It is on.
Okay. So I'm Yasmin Skanji, and I'm a scientist director of the RDI department ZAC from Igenair Group, France. And we're providing services and solutions for indoor air quality management in buildings.
Nice to meet you, Yasmin.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's start by tackling IEQ through the life cycle of a building. Do you see any stage more impactful than the other to maintain adequate IEQ? Is design more impactful? Is commissioning, installation, operation, maintenance? Each one of those have its significance. So what are your thoughts on that? IEQ throughout the life cycle of a building. Anyone can take the lead on that.
I'll take a stab at this, and I'll be the least educated person to answer this, least qualified. So if I were a queen for a day, I like that term, I would start with design and create space for proper mechanical systems, use the right materials. But I also believe that when we really learn about indoor environmental quality and human health, it will change the building materials and will change how we use spaces. For example, in a hospital, in a cold climate, because I do think relative humidity is incredibly important for human healing, managing that. I think the most vulnerable patients should be in the center of the building. We all want views of nature. I'd rather go home and have a view of my yard than, to die in the hospital with a beautiful window. That kind of goes against the design standards right now. But I think as we begin to understand more about this intersection of health and the indoor environment, we can put our more vulnerable people in a different part of the building. So I think there's going to be a unification of how we use buildings spatially and also with building materials so that we can actually use materials that can begin to modulate the indoor environmental quality, such as porous materials that can modulate indoor water vapor levels. So I think, just like I think we need to bring together silos of medicine and the building industry, we need to bring together building materials with how we manage the air. But that's a very,
so that
I'm
hits
not an
on
engineer.
the design. That hits mainly on the design phase of buildings. We've visited numerous buildings where they were designed as LEED Gold even. You go through the operational phase and you find the filters left with only the frame, which says a lot about the maintenance aspects. So, Tobias, can you please?
It's definitely rightly said. The biggest impact would be in the design phase, no question about that. But in many cases, we actually work in buildings that already exist. So we cannot fix the design phase anymore. And there, of course, maintenance has a major impact. Because if we're just looking at the air filters you just mentioned, and as Dr. Iat earlier mentioned as well, if we stick to low-cost washable filters just because we want to reduce first cost, we could basically leave away the air filters if we're talking about indoor air quality. They may trap sand, yes, they do, but they will not trap anything that's relevant to our health. Because sand is a hygiene problem, no question. But sand in itself is not dangerous. What's really critical is the small particles. We heard it earlier, PM2.5, PM1, even ultrafine particles we have to talk about. And working with basic filtration solutions, which are even damaged after cleaning, will not help at all in protecting us. And if we look at the energy, that's always the main argument, but the other one would use more energy. That's actually not true. Because looking at a filter that's washed, there's two things that can happen to a filter if you wash it. Either it clogs, then the energy consumption is tremendous, even if it doesn't work, or it breaks. Then you could basically leave it away. So by going to more sustainable solutions, so there are many filters on the market, air filters that have high efficiencies against PM2.5, PM1, which actually do not have a higher pressure drop than any of these simple so-called low-cost solutions, which in the end are not low-cost. You have lower first costs, yes, but you pay twice. You pay with higher energy consumptions, and you pay with low indoor air quality. So in terms of maintenance, there's a lot we can do here.
Carrying on from this, actually, so filters are low energy measures, let's say, to IEQ. What are your thoughts on the energy-intensive measures? Anyone, maybe Martin can take this.
To add to Tobias here, I mean, having high-efficiency filters in the terms of filtration efficiency with a low energy consumption, let's call it, it's not contradictory as well. These filters exist, and they're even certified. You have the Eurovent certification for air filters, which guide you here a little bit in the right direction of which filters to also choose. So I'm here confirming
Other than
with
filters,
Tobias.
though. Let's say if we're talking about enlarging our fresh air handling units, energy-intensive, energy-consuming equipment, how can we, let's say, convince the market of their importance? It again goes back to measuring IEQ and the same question, but there is a lot of talk about IEQ driving energy higher, and it is a barrier to entry in the market.
Okay, yeah, Omnia, if I may add here, then I think we need to start much earlier. Start with the legislation. As one measure, you always need the boundary conditions ready to support this framework, because we have proven over the past decades, the industry, the people, they need a push. We have seen in Europe, for instance, when we introduced this eco-design framework a decade or more ago, this really gave a push and it worked. And now these energy efficient technologies, they are being applied. So that's one thing, legislation, then followed by the education, the combinations of all these factors. But I would say with the legislation, it starts. And then, of course, the legislation needs to be enforced as well. It shouldn't just be words on paper.
Very true, very true. If I move the discussion to Bill, how can we drive product innovation in the realm of indoor air quality? What is the main driver to product innovation?
Can you see me?
We can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Okay. I'm having camera problems, so I'll try to work on that while we're talking. But, you know, a lot of the technologies exist already today, and they've existed as options out there. In the past, though, it's been a difficult sell for manufacturers to end users because there wasn't, you know, a driver for it. Obviously, we've seen that change. The concern as the pandemic finally abates and goes away is people drifting back to going to low-cost efforts and not really paying attention to the IEQ and filtration and all the other options that we have. You know, when it comes to energy, obviously the higher the filter level you put in, the more energy you'll use. But there's you know, I think what we've seen and what we've learned through the ASHRAE, you know, ETF is that there's a lot of opportunity to use hybrid systems where you might employ maybe a lower level of filtration and UV lighting, or standalone in-room air cleaners, or you know, UV in the actual room bathing the space. So there are opportunities to use hybrid type systems that could be incorporated into existing air handling type units, things like that, to kind of get us to where we need to go at a much less of an energy penalty than bringing in, you know, all outside air.
Yasmin, if I move the conversation to you again on product innovation, what are your thoughts on that?
Actually, I think we're talking a lot about energy, but we definitely have to find the right balance between indoor air quality and the energy costs in a building to manage the environment quite good. We're providing many solutions, and for me, the future has to focus about combining all the information and making this metadata that we are measuring to talk a little bit more and being totally connected to the BMS system of the buildings to provide the best maintenance and justify it correctly.
Fair enough. What are your thoughts on combating airborne diseases and transmitted airborne diseases? Again, this is a question for anyone. David, if you'd like to take it, or...
Sure, I'll be happy to.
Please.
I try to keep it relatively simple, you know, not only so that I can understand it, but perhaps lay people can as well. And at the end of the day, when it comes down to the pathogens, viruses, and other contaminants of concern that are conveyed indoors via airborne mechanisms, they're all particles. You know, I mean, it boils down to everything in the air is a particle. And if we can work to both efficiently and effectively remove those particles from the air that we are breathing, and they are no longer in the air, they can't hurt us. And so I think making ventilation and filtration not only efficient, because many buildings have efficient ventilation and filtration systems installed, but they may not be effective for various reasons. One of those reasons may be that they're just not maintained. They're not serviced like they should be. They're not operated like they should be. They've never been commissioned, or there may be enhancements that can be made to make them better, to make them more effective. And at the end of the day, anything we can do to more effectively remove the particles from the air indoors that we are breathing, I think will go a long way to creating a much healthier environment for everyone in every building anywhere in the world.
Thank you very much, David. Dr. Stephanie, so you've been engaged on multiple frontiers as a clinical practitioner, as a consultant, and elsewhere. Where do you see the main drivers coming from? Is it from the manufacturing side, from the regulatory side, or from the end user side?
So what are the main drivers for improvement in this area? That's, again, I'm not just saying that's a great question to say that. It's a great question. And in my experience, one of the issues that has perpetuated poor indoor air quality is this disconnect between who's responsible for the building and who uses the building. So, you know, in your home, you want your loved ones to be safe. So we tend to do more, perhaps, if we know what to do. In a commercial office building, you have the building owner who may not really want to spend a lot of money on improving tenant experiences. And then you have the business owner in there somewhere, depending on what the use of the building is. So in my experience, the most powerful driver of improved indoor air quality are mothers. And I don't mean disrespect to fathers, because fathers are awesome too. But for example, where I live in Vermont, we've had parents, primarily mothers, sneaking little monitors into their kids' backpack. And the school doesn't necessarily want them in the school, because if there's a problem, it will.
That's a good idea. Maybe I'll do that.
Right?
I'll do that. That's a good idea.
True. And so I think that somehow creating more continuity between the user and the person who is choosing how much money to spend. And I'm not sure how to do that. I think in a senior living community, that continuity is more prevalent, because the connection between poor indoor air quality and financial outcomes and emotional outcomes is evident. But so I think somehow, and again, I come back to creating visibility for everyone around what's going on in terms of air quality. I think that's very beneficial, because whether you're a tenant, whether you're a parent or a child or employee, you can see what's going on. So I think just removing the disconnects between accountability and end users is the most powerful way to move forward.
All right. Let me go to my last question, then we'll move to the audience. From the manufacturer's perspective, the technology is there. Is it adequately used and maintained? What are your observations from the market when you sell your products? How do you see them? Is there a lack in maintenance, education, facility management? What are your thoughts on that end?
Thanks, Tobias.
We'll hear from you both.
Yeah, no problem. So, as we said, the technology is already there, but I think it's not fully utilized everywhere. So we still have a way to go, as mentioned earlier, also during my presentation. As said, for instance, here we focus on more the cooling aspect, the recirculation system, so many things that could be there, but they are simply not. It just needs a push to get there. I mean, the whole COVID pandemic over the past years really has given this sector a push and raised the awareness on these subjects, which were previously not there. As said, we should make sure to not lose this momentum now. So we should keep it in people's heads and really work together to get there, to make it more utilized.
I'll say something quickly if I can.
Please do.
From a manufacturer's perspective, you know, what you strive for is to create a product that's efficient, effective, and can be maintained, because, you know, we as manufacturers know that at the end of the day, there's a life cycle analysis that should be done on anything that an owner looks at and installs in their building. And that life cycle analysis, of course, includes the first cost to put it in, and then the operational costs from a standpoint of energy consumption, and then, even more so, the life cycle costs from a standpoint of maintenance and replacement and things of that nature. And many, many, many times the maintainability of a particular product or system is the largest overall cost based on the life cycle of that particular product or technology that's been installed, assuming maybe it could last for 20 years. So it's very important that the end users purchasing products, regardless of what they are, regardless of what type of air cleaning or IEQ technology it is, take all of those costs into consideration and keep a keen eye on maintainability and replacement costs over the life cycle of the system.
You have anything to add?
I can just agree to what has been said, because there is the main course why we, in many cases, have a not perfect maintenance of the system, to say it politely, is probably the disconnect between the user and the one who's responsible. That's one side. The other side is, of course, the training aspect. Because if we look at the total cost of the building, maintaining the system doesn't actually cost you money. It saves money. If we just go for the simple example of air filters, changing an air filter in time will reduce its energy consumption significantly. And the energy that you save by that is significantly more than what the whole product costs that you put in a certain replacement. So it's a lot of missing information and, honestly, in some cases, simply different cost centers. One just being responsible for the maintenance, where, of course, not maintaining is cheaper than maintaining, and the building owner believing that everything is done, but at the same time, we actually pay more in terms of energy, and we pay, of course, a bill in terms of bad indoor air quality by not doing that maintenance.
Very true.
So in the end, unlike you would expect, there is no conflict between energy consumption and indoor air quality. On the opposite, in many cases, it goes exactly in the same direction. We just have to be aware and really understand the TCO of the building, the TCO of the application. What's the total cost of ownership of running it? And basically running a system well maintained.
Very true.
Saves you money and the system serves its purpose.
Very, very true. Allow me to please. Yeah, sure.
I mean, to add to what
Tobias said. Here, I think that is a very good point, and I think it goes to what Dr. Taylor had mentioned. That you really have two buckets of money, right? Whenever you're building the building, you have a capital expense, and you have to be able to convince the building owner that they need to put the system in the first place. And a good stick for that is regulation or making it mandatory and standards that are required by code. And then to the last speaker's point, really the operating budget is where, and this is true with energy efficiency too, the rubber hits the road. And if there isn't the institutional will to maintain these systems, you're never going to be fully effective. So I think you really need to find a way of holding the operating budget folks accountable to keeping things up. And then when it comes to the capital expense, making sure that it's mandatory either by code or by standard to put the system in the first place.
Martin, please.
Yeah, what I still wanted to highlight is, let's look also more at the end user. In the end, we of course hope we get to the situation that the demands comes from the end user, the people living in the house, for instance. There, see also we have a long way to go. I mean, why can't HVAC be? It needs to be a more sexy topic. Let's be honest. It needs to be as sexy as a smartphone or people that want an electric car, and that will also change the perception. And if people then proactively call for it, then the whole pattern beforehand might change as well, from a manufacturer side to the maintenance. Let's say you have this nice smart apps now you can use for your boiler or also your air conditioner that visualize everything. It's super fancy. That makes the topic cool. We need to create the same for indoor air quality.
Yeah.
And in the end, the user, as Tobias said, needs to realize IEQ pays off.
What we see with IEQ that it's mainly driven by problems rather than the invisible effects of it. So when we get requests to look into indoor air quality, it's always one of three things. It's either we can smell food being cooked from our neighbor's house, or we're having a lot of headaches in the office and there must be something wrong related to air quality or lighting or it's sometimes it's driven by an energy audit that is being conducted, and then you find related IEQ issues. But yes, I agree. It should become a cool topic that would drive better air quality everywhere. Do we have time for questions from the audience? Okay, please. We have a question here. Please introduce yourself and then go ahead with the question.
Hi, my name is Jatin. I'm from Opure Air Quality Solutions. So I was just adding on to the point that you were mentioning about how we're approaching the indoor environment quality right now in the buildings. There are two aspects which I would like your thoughts upon. Is the you mentioned, Tobias, about the cost center silos, and there are different cost centers. There are two parts which we need to look at a bigger level or a higher level. Also, is there is a different entity which makes the building, and there is a different entity which operates the building, and sometimes there is no transition between the two, first of all. Second, what is your view on the short-term and long-term approach to building management? And related to that is also about how are we targeting or how are we addressing the repurposefulness of any building? Because if you're looking at a long-term view of any building, it may not remain for the purpose it is today, 5 or 10 years down the line. Are we catering to the repurposefulness of any building, or are we catering to planning for that repurposefulness of those buildings today to actually save a lot of costs, overruns in the long run? Thank you.
Okay, so two questions basically, addressing the disconnection between design, installation, commissioning, operation, and maintenance. And the other question is about operating for keeping in mind the life of the building. So I'd say predictive maintenance and the like. Would anyone like to volunteer? Would you? So we rarely see designers design buildings and then go visit the buildings that they have designed to see how their designs are working, basically, effectively. And it's always a case when you're handing over a building, those who are involved in the commissioning are not involved in the operation, so there's always disconnection. The handshakes are not, the process of the handshake is not always well done, and this causes a lot of problems. Now, operating a building with predictive maintenance in mind, maybe we should hear from Tobias. Would you like to?
It's not easy to give the one answer to that, how to optimize that. I can just share one experience that I have from my home country in Germany, where we had actually, of course, we had similar issues, and that ended up basically up with a regulation. That regulation that does not only look at the ventilation requirement of a building when it's built, but other parts of the same standard refer to how those things have to be maintained over time, down to precise checklists, going down to a first filter stage has to be checked every 12 months. If it reaches that level, take it out. Only if that parameters are fulfilled, you're allowed to use it. So very simple, down to the really basic steps. And then, of course, that would ease that a lot. So the more clear guidance that's there, so the more standardized the system is, the easier it is for sure for the maintenance company to take it over. And the more standardized the maintenance approach is, the easier it is. Then the one side knows what to build because they're fulfilling specific regulations, and the other side knows what they will take over, what the dimension should be, and how to maintain it.
Yes.
That could help to avoid not all mistakes, but at least the biggest ones, that we have a completely wrong dimensioning or a complete misconception of what needs to be done in the maintenance.
So maintain to prolong rather than maintain to fail. It's two different aspects, let's say. Do we have any?
Can I add something to that?
Please do.
Add something to that real
yes,
quickly?
yes, definitely.
I'm not going to suggest an answer because that is a very complex problem. I'm going to add to the problem a little bit, and I think Dr. Taylor will probably this will resound with her a little bit. In the healthcare vertical market, we are being tasked with not only building buildings hospitals that may need to be something else a short distance into the future, that need to be fueled by electricity now, where we use natural gas quite consistently and quite broadly across the scope. But as well, hospitals are being tasked with providing responsiveness and resiliency so that they can respond when perhaps another pandemic of this type comes along. So we have to build buildings. We don't know exactly what they're going to be. We're not exactly sure how we're going to heat them and cool them. And we have to make them so that we can respond and have resiliency to something that we have no idea what that may be. So it's a big problem right now in the healthcare industry. Maybe others as well.
I think it's across the board in schools as well, and in other building types. Do we have more questions from the audience that we can take? We have a question here.
Hello. Thank you. Hello. Yes. Hello. Yeah. Good afternoon. This is Lavanya. I'm looking after sustainability in a hotel known as the Tower Plaza Hotel. My question is, how far or near we are to visualize or to have something like, for example, we can see the temperature of a room or a relative humidity of a room in the form of a number, right? So how far or how near we are to see the indoor air quality of a room or of a building, like for any layman to understand, like if you see a building, whether I can rent an office in that building or not. For that, maybe we are checking the visible factors now, but can we see what is the indoor quality of that particular office or something so that we can rent that? Are we near or far?
So a question about visibility when it comes to IEQ, basically.
What is the question again?
Visibility. So how can we, again, circling back to the dashboards and visualizing indoor air quality. So the question is, how close are we to see that widespread?
How close are we to it?
To see that mainstream or widespread practice that you see dashboards quantifying IEQ in every office or in every space.
I think that's totally the future of the subject. COVID pandemic just has encouraged the visibility of the subject because it's an invisible pollution. That's a problem. And sometimes people are totally confusing air quality with other sensors like smell, bad or good odor. So a big part of our work actually as industrials and professionals in the sector is educating our customers first and helping them to put visibility. So for the future, I think we need to get specific points to have these 11 pollutants that Dr. Taylor has described, and I totally agreed with her because I'm working in the same way from France, and we need to get this metadata talking and providing the good informations to have the best predictive maintenance of the building. I think that's the best thing, and we need to provide all these informations on dashboards and put the light and awareness, making them like an easy informations, as we are not anymore, we cannot live anymore without our smartphones, so we need to not living without IEQ informations provided.
I think we're very close, and I love this discussion. You know, we have the sensor technology, the prices are coming down. We have metagenomic analysis, so we can see what's in the air. We have the ability to measure inflammatory markers in a human being. We have computers, so we can analyze all these data points and see how they fit together. I think we're pretty much there. It's just, in my experience anyway, it's a matter of people are figuring out a model where it's not too expensive to monitor buildings and to create remediation strategies that are effective. And I think that to have sensors tie in with the BMS, that's my dream. You know, sort of create an endocrine system for your building. You know, you have an action, you have a response, you have modulation of the response, and I think it's both effective and energy efficient.
Well, we're definitely seeing that required in some buildings, so we're getting there for sure, and hopefully it will be widespread very, very soon. I think this concludes our panel. Thank you very much for your time. It was a very interesting discussion, and we're going to. We have a question. Okay, a comment.
My comment is. I was living in China for a long time. They have a way to educate, to teach consumer how to use their products. Usually when we buy an AC or TV or any machines, there is a brochure. Usually, I guess 95% people, they don't read anything because the writing way is very small and a lot of information with many pages. They have a nice way, I think. They have every machine has 2 dimensions, QR So simply they used to scan the QR, and they got a short movie for 3 or 5 minutes. And of course, they can see the movie many times, anytime there. So because the QR, the stick on the machine. So this is a nice way. Just my comment is to educate consumer by this way. You have to take in your consideration old people. Maybe their eyes not good enough to read, or maybe they cannot read, or small children, or so this short movie is convenient for all the classes of the society.
Very interesting. I think this is a way of making it cool, like you were mentioning.
Exactly. And here, maybe to add to the previous question also, it would be the nicest situation in the future that if you go to a restaurant, for example, people make a buying decision based on factors like indoor air quality. And that becomes, it really becomes a factor.
It would be nice, but I think it would have a lot of resistance too.
Yeah, well, we're still a bit away from it. Exactly. Actually, we both have, and we've all seen the solutions, they exist. And actually, probably you can confirm that, Morten, also from your side, we all even have customers who want that. Yeah. If you just go out, you can see an air quality monitor being held right here. And we even have customers like some hotels in India and Delhi, where the outdoor air is obviously not that good, that really show that to their customers to show what's the difference in here. What's the air quality you get? Yep. And if that's the first small plants growing, but that will be the future for sure.
And it can be most important, as mentioned earlier. It needs to be simple. We cannot confront the end user with 20, 30 different values of which they don't understand 75%. We need to come up with an easy, let's say, traffic light system whatsoever, or as we do with the new EN standard, it's like IEQ 1, IEQ 2, easy to understand levels.
Totally agree.
I think the takeaway of this panel is that the technology is there. The will does not match the technology, so we need to get it there. Thank you very much for your time. We'll break for coffee, then we will convene back in 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.